thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to Taub for partnering with us on this event. And of course, a special thank you to the Helen Daniels Beda Fund for their support of this event. This year, Israel and Singapore are celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations, and the two countries have much in common. Both are young countries formed after a period of British rule. Both are small, both in size and in population, and confined and surrounded by hostile nations with very few natural resources, if any. Both have a diverse population makeup and as such face unique challenges formulating policies that can meet the unique circumstances of each population group. And in its 54 years of existence, Singapore has proved its strength in strategic and forward planning, and I feel this is something that Israel can learn a great deal from Singapore in this respect. By 2035, Israel's aging population is set to double, with 14.6% of the population projected to be over the age of 65. Now, along with other nations in East and Southeast Asia, Singapore is a rapidly aging society. Its median age rose from 29.8 in 1990 to 40 in 2016, and its over 65 population will grow to 25% by 2030. However, since the 1980s, Singapore has implemented a range of policies and schemes towards healthy aging. And as Israel now develops its own national plan on aging preparedness, this event will look at Singapore as a case study and best practices that Israel can learn and adapt from Singapore, and in particular models for long-term financing of healthcare for the elderly. So we look forward to hearing from our speakers today and the ensuing discussions. So thank you very much all for coming.
Israel's population, while relatively young, is aging. The share of seniors aged 70 plus is expected to double by 2035. And as a result, functional impairment will grow 16% faster than growth in the population, with an increasing need for institutional and long-term care. And currently half of the spending on long-term care in Israel is publicly funded. And it's also spread, the responsibility for it is spread across a number of ministries and authorities. We don't have in Israel universal long-term care. And the share of private expenditure on long-term care is 45% or so, which is about triple the OECD average, which stands at 16%. And the extensive reliance, of course, on private funding has implications for inequality between households based on income.
כשהגעתי לכנסת זאת קדנציה הראשונה שלי, מצאתי המון נושאים שהכנסת מטפלת, המחוקקים מטפלים, יושבים, דנים, לעומק, מקבלים החלטות, אבל פתאום הבנתי שאין בכנסת ועדה שמטפלת במיליון איש במדינת ישראל. אנחנו היום במיליון איש. יש ועדה לזכויות הילד, שזה נפלא, מצוין, פשוט. יש ועדה למעמד האישה, שזה גם כן לא פחות חשוב. אבל אין ועדה שמתרכזת ומתמקדת בנושא של זקנה. כשהתחלתי לטפל בנושא הזקנה, מאוד מהר הבנתי שהבעיה הגדולה שלנו, של החברה, כל מה שקשור לזקנה, זה שאף אחד לא מסתכל קדימה. אנחנו פותרים רק את הבעיות שמחר צצות לנו בתקשורת. אם אנחנו עכשיו לא נתחיל לחשוב קדימה, המדינה שלנו תעמוד לקראת הקטסטרופה החברתית הבאה.
The major point is, of course, that we are in the middle of a very serious demographic change, and the elderly population is growing, not only in numbers. We have more elderly people, but the elderly people are older. So there is a need for a national plan. There are some specific programs, but that is not what we actually need. We need a comprehensive look at all the issues related to aging in one picture, in one plan. We did make recommendations, specific recommendations, and we hope that it will be adopted by the government. But still, there is a need for a follow-up in planning and taking this proposal. It is a proposal, yes, and translate it into a government program. And at that point, there will be a need, and this for you, Doc. At this point, and for you, there is a need to translate this program into shekalim. It needs a budget attached to all these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a lot of similarities, Israel and Singapore. Not just the size, not just the people, the youngness of the countries, but also share similarities in some of the balagat, right? With respect to particularly long-term care, which we'll touch on towards the end of my presentation. So the presentation will be in two parts. Maybe I'll give you a little bit of background about Singapore and the way that it is aging. It is slightly different to Israel. And that will be the first part of my presentation, just a bit of background and context. And then second, I'll look into some of the things that we're specifically doing with a focus on what David asked me to focus on, the financing aspects, which are quite unique that we've developed. Unique primarily for retirement adequacy and health. Not so good in long-term care. But some of those lessons that we've learned from developing that health financing institutions, we're now starting to adopt for long-term care financing. So maybe we have some lessons for ourselves that we can also implement. This first slide is a bit complicated, I apologize. On the y-axis, going up, is the percentage of the population aged 25 years and below. Below 25 years. And on the x-axis, at the bottom, you have the percentage of the population 65 years and above. So countries, societies that have populations at the top left-hand side of the diagram are young populations. And that's where we were in Singapore. There's no pointer, but you can see the red square. In 1950, Singapore, right at the top, left-hand side there. Israel is also similarly at the top, the blue pentagon. Okay. So Israel moves in 50 years, in 1950 to 2000, down that line, so aging. But Singapore also does that movement. Israel is projected to go from there to around about the middle in the next 50 years, following 2000. Singapore does this huge move. Right? So it's the second most rapidly aging population in the world after Korea.
Everything is doing faster than us.
So that's a function of very low fertility rates that Dov had in his picture, in his slide earlier. It's particularly acute. So we'll have this really rapid transition from young in 1950 to a super age society back in 2050. So it's a very rapid transition. In fact, I have another slide, another diagram shortly that shows you that's happening very rapidly in the next 15 years.
Isn't it also because of longevity?
It is, but it's the two things. But if you had to pinpoint one thing that is different, because our longevity is no different to Israel's, it's the fertility decline that has prompted this, and that had benefits for Singapore in the early parts. Again, I have another slide to explain this, but our longevity is similar to Israel's, 84 for women, just over 80 for men. So not dissimilar to Israel's. So again, this is the history. So this is our population pyramid in 1980. Already you're starting to see that fertility decline, bringing that population pyramid, no longer a pyramid shape, in. Okay. and this is the progression in 10-year steps to 2010, and you can see the population, the bulk of the population moving into the working ages, right? And this is the first demographic dividend I'll show on later on. Okay, but by 2040, you kind of see this turning into a very rapid, different shape. Okay, so the majority of the population are also above 85, and hopefully by that time, 85-year-olds will not be what they are today. They will be a lot healthier and more productive. But that's the picture that we will see.
What's the birth rate in Singapore?
The total fertility rate is
Birth rate.
the birth rate about 30,000 births a year. 30,000 births a year, but the total fertility rate is 1.2, and we dropped below replacement level in 1977. So we've had 40 years, more than 40 years worth of below replacement level fertility. And then that really is the result. The result is population aging, rapid population aging. So the potential support ratio, which is the ratio of population 20 to 64 over the population 65 and above, is declining very rapidly. Singapore, the red line. Israel, I put there for comparison, also aging, perhaps at a slower pace, but also going to happen, right? And you'll see this effects over the course of the next 40 years or so. This is the demographic dividend that I kind of just alluded to earlier with that change in the population age structure. Right? So the period 1967, 2 years after independence, and roughly the mid-2000s, we had this very rapid increase in the share of the population that was of working age. So people, effective producers, right? They're all working, their income is exceeding their consumption, they're generating a lot of savings for the future, right? And that's your first demographic dividend. It contributed 2.9 percentage points to our GDP per capita growth over that almost 40-year period, right? 37 years of very rapid productivity growth. Right, because your working age population is growing so rapidly. Okay, 38% of our GDP growth, which was hugely strong over that period, was attributed just to the population age structure alone. Okay, so huge contribution to our economic growth over that period. But roughly, maybe 6-7 years ago, we started to see that reverse with the population age structure. So more people are retiring, the cohorts that are 65 years and above increasing, and the unwinding of that first demographic dividend has already started. And that will lead to a drag on economic growth of about 1.5 percentage points per annum over the course of the next 40, 50 years until 2060. It's a significant drag on economic growth. So just, needless to say, this is a particularly pressing problem for Singapore. We are aging so quickly, we need to do something. So we've recognized this, and there have been many sort of committees, reports being produced at a national level to talk about the kind of the challenges of the elderly. So in the 1980s, we had the report of the Committee on the Problems of the Aged. In 1990, we had a very significant focus on this. The Interministerial Committee on the Aging Population produced a report. So not just one ministry, but all of the ministries in Singapore and the government got together to discuss the aging population. In 2000, another elder care master plan, a Committee on Aging Issues report, so an update on what was discussed in 1999. And then culminating just over 2 years ago in the formulation of an action plan for successful aging. And these are the areas in which the action plan will look at. Again, not that dissimilar to what Professor Brick discussed with Israel's plan. We didn't have a specific focus on poverty, but you'll see similar things like employment in there, employability. We'll talk about health and wellness, obviously, social engagement and inclusion, housing. Okay, so but 10 focal areas that you see there. We've got lifelong learning as one of those areas where, to keep your seniors engaged, it's one of the major focal points that we'll certainly be looking at, and there's a plan for that. We've created a special training program for all ages, but with a dedicated focus on older people as well, called Skills Future. And research on aging. I was talking to Howie just now, and 3 years ago, now 5 years ago, time is passing. 5 years ago, we started our equivalent of the Health and Retirement Survey in Singapore, in the US, in Singapore. I think it's Cher in Europe, Charles in China, and many of these longitudinal panel surveys of elder people. We started ours 4 years ago, and we're now in our third wave. Okay. The other thing that we've done is to look at the kind of how we are aging in Singapore, and we've used the UN ECE framework to compare ourselves, the pace of our aging across with other European countries. And this is how the active aging index maps to our action plan for successful aging. So you see domains of employment, participation in society, independent, healthy, and secure living, capacity, and an enabling environment for active aging, kind of reasonably map out to what I just described about the 10 focal areas in Singapore's action plan. And just very briefly then, just to go through this, I think Dr. Berg-Warman, who's here with us, I think today, love to meet you after if you are, did this for Israel, and Israel stacked up quite nicely against this index. Good to meet you, and would love to have a conversation with you later on. Singapore stacks up quite well in the overall ranking. This is for 2014 against the 2014 index. But in particular, as we'll see shortly, in employment and the capacity for active aging. In employment, we stacked up almost the best, and this is in our share of the employed above, the older people. Right? So the labour force participation rate for elder people is quite high, particularly amongst men, but we've seen very rapid gains amongst women as well. But many of these people are doing so primarily because of financial reasons. Right? So they have to work rather than desiring work voluntarily. A lot of people are working to older ages because of or are in low-skilled work, so the quality of work is also not that great. And just to make a comparison, the second-ranked country after Singapore, Sweden, the score there is high employment rates of the elderly, but described as 55 to 64. Even in Sweden, you start to see that drop off quite quickly after the ages of 65. And one of the things that I guess been debated in Sweden is this shift to a dynamically linked retirement age, and that's something that we're also considering in Singapore, which is linked to life expectancy rather than just a fixed chronological age. Participation in society, we ranked really low, and two reasons for that. Our volunteering rates amongst the elderly particularly low, and perhaps not surprising here because they're all working, so they have very little time to volunteer. And they also, don't have that much time then to care for their fellow elderly and their children, the grandchildren. Exactly, with fertility rates. So I mean that's less true of the oldest old in Singapore. But yes, you're right. That the family structures are very quickly changing. I'll run through some of these. I mean, again, I've already described this low ranking because of these reasons. Independent living, we also rank quite low. Again, maybe this is not a bad thing. In Singapore, it's a small place. Our public housing is of high order. 84% of the population live in public housing, and all high-rise flats, apartments. So it might not make bad sense for older people to live in proximity or with their family members. So whilst we rank not so great in terms of independent living, this is the result of our particular living arrangements. And yes, physical activities we rank quite highly. Maybe it's because we have a lot of people doing Tai Chi and all that sort of stuff. But there we are. And then capacity for active aging amongst elder Singaporeans, reasonably high. Self-rated capacity for being mentally acute. That was quite high, we found. Okay, so that just gives you a brief backdrop on Singapore's pace towards a super-aged society. I'll next move on to the part that I think Doug asked me to focus on, which is the care continuum. I'll start off with some comparative statistics and also a description of how we've arranged our care continuum or care ecosystem. So this is healthcare, and I compared 3 Asian countries. Again, these are super aged or will be super aged societies: Japan, Korea, and Singapore. This is the healthcare expenditure as a percentage of GDP. The data from Japan, Korea, and Israel from OECD health data. Singapore's we calculated ourselves. We spent in 2017 5% of our GDP on healthcare, about the bulk of which coming from out of pocket. So this is the families or the individual's expense, and 2.2%. So about 40% of which is coming from the government public health expenditure, and Israel 7.4%. So almost 50% more than Singapore on a percentage of GDP basis. And Japan, Korea again much higher. US 17 point. I think 2017 was about 17.6% of GDP on health expenditure. In terms of comparative long-term care statistics, the things that I actually wanted to point out here on this slide, on this table, is the number of institutional beds per 1,000 elderly, and this might interest some of the people in this room. That we stack up quite low in Singapore. 27 beds.
What do you include by institution?
It's nursing homes. Nursing homes.
Nursing homes.
Yeah, mainly. Yeah. I think I couldn't quite get a good number for Israel. It said OECD health statistics said 19, which sounds quite low, and I couldn't reconcile that with the statistic that Professor Brodsky and others calculated in 2010 for Israel, and they gave an estimate of 48 beds. So that I used that number instead as a comparison. But that's really where we've got a problem. That we have very low capacity at the moment in terms of nursing care. in Singapore. Also, the number of long-term care workers, our manpower, our support for the elderly, both in home care as well as in the institutional side of things, is also not as high. We have a very strong dependence on foreign domestic workers, so maids, helpers from largely Southeast Asian countries that have come to Singapore to provide help, to provide care for our elders as well as our children. But these are low-skilled. They don't have any qualifications. All they're doing is your basic care work. So that is one of the big challenges that we've got. Not enough manpower. And what we've done is also had a firm concentration of care delivered in the tertiary, the hospital context. Right? So a lot of our care is delivered in the in hospitals, general hospitals, and there has been less of a focus on community and care at home. So that has been a sort of a drive, an initiative to shift that away from very expensive care in a hospital. We had a few years back a problem of hospital bed shortages because people were sending their parents, elder parents to the hospital and were jamming up the hospitals because the incentives, as I'll show later, are skewed towards care in the hospitals. Okay. So on the left-hand side, you'll see Kutek Wat Hospital, one of our newest hospitals, general hospitals. And instead, we're trying to move that towards the picture on your right, which is it's our latest community development for the elderly. It's called Kampong Admiralty, and it's an integrated complex whereby elderly live. They can work, they play integrated with the community. But there's lots of infrastructure that is catered for them. It's high rise, about 10 stories tall on the right hand side. Yeah, so that's the model that we are moving towards. But in fact, many of our nursing homes don't look like this. This is the ideal that we're working towards.
It's for sick people or it's for ordinary people?
It's for older people.
You compare it to a tertiary medical center, so it's not the same population.
Yeah. So this is not for sick people, but these are yeah. So it's I guess the equivalent would be assisted living facilities. Yeah.
Because the policy is to move into assisted living like this.
We're trying to set up more of these accommodation for older people, so that they can, and also the other thing that we're trying to do is create community health or hospitals that will allow for people to step down from a hospital setting to the community hospital, and then maybe transit from the community hospital when they can, either to their homes or to a location like this, depending on whether they can live by themselves at home or move into this more assisted living type situation.
This is subsidized by the government or it's from private pocket?
This is public housing.
Public.
This is public housing. Okay, and in Singapore we have again a very sort of unique, very extensive provision of public housing. As I said earlier, 84% of the population live in public housing, built and managed, but owned by the people.
84?
84%. It's one of the highest proportions of people living in public housing. And I don't have a picture of it, okay, but...
And what they pay rent?
What does it mean, public houses? You don't have to pay anything?
No. So it's built by the government, sold to the people, sold to them at cheap prices, very subsidized prices, heavily subsidized prices. And then, they can live in it rent-free, right? So they paid for it, they own it.
And the services around are governmental?
And the services, the estate is all owned by the government.
Okay.
And they will sell,
Once
units.
they pass away, who buys it, who gets it, once they pass away.
They can pass it on to the families, right? But they're sold,
It's a different story. I know not exactly.
It is, yeah. It's worthwhile talking about because it forms a big pillar in our retirement security, and the mechanism by which we will talk about some of the ways in which Singapore has prepared for older age is through this housing pillar, as well as the other things that we'll talk about, and it's modulated through our pension system. Again, I have a slide, we'll deal with this extensively later on. Okay, so the point, this is Kampong Admiralty, this housing. But if you look at the back here and here, that is public housing. Those are public housing flats, 15, 20 stories tall. The typical family lives in a 3, 4, 5 bedroom flat, about 1,000 square feet, 100 square meters in size, 90 to 100 square meters in size. Okay. I showed you not enough long-term care capacity, but we are building it. The expectation is that by 2020 we would have increased the daycare centers to 6,200 places, and home care facilities will also increase quite rapidly as well. Okay. And again, all of this paid for by the government. So our long-term care spending as a percentage of GDP, public health care spending on long-term care, 0.3% in 2017, and this will rise very significantly, probably double, perhaps triple.
What's the difference between the two, the daycare centers and the home care?
Yeah, so if they're receiving care in the home, what they will do is set up facilities that are at the bottom of where they live. So again, most Singaporeans live in high-rise flats. So if they're getting care at home, these are places that they can go to during the day and receive daycare.
Who is eligible?
And the other one?
Home care. Yeah, sorry, daycare is daycare, and then home care is in the home. So this is the provision of services.
Support services.
Support services.
Who is
in their
eligible?
home. I'm sorry?
Who is eligible? Everyone?
No, heavily means tested. So in Singapore, all our public expenditure, subsidies and schemes, public schemes, are heavily means tested. So the individuals means tested, and also the family resources are taken into account. We care about where you live. So if you own a home and you own a big home, you're less eligible to subsidies. Heavily means tested. And the more you own, the more you earn, the less you get the support from the government.
Excuse me.
Yes.
If I understood it correctly, you're talking about high-rise building with a mixed population. Not all of them are elderly.
Yes, that's the ideal.
And let's say the first floor or ground floor, you have like a community center where they can go and they have no problem of moving or being moved from one.
We'll have gardens on the top there, as you see, and at the bottom there's a lot of physicians, so general practitioners that will provide primary care. You'll have a daycare center around there. Yeah. And there'll be kindergartens in that complex.
So you'll have daycare centers for the babies as well for the elderly?
Yeah, co-located.
Okay.
In the same
Same
area.
complex.
Yeah, same complex.
How many people live in
This one, about 2,000.
2,000?
2,000.
2,000?
2,000 people. 2,000 to 2,500. I don't know the exact number. 1,000 apartments? Yeah, it goes, yeah, it's not just this bit, there's after that.
2,000 families or 2,000 people?
People. Okay, I'll move on quickly. So this is my my last part of the presentation, and it focuses on this social care policies and financing. So we have some principles of social support, and the most important one of which is self-reliance and individual responsibility. So you are responsible for yourself. A lot of our welfare is dependent on you having worked in your lifetime. Right? You haven't accumulated savings in your pension if you haven't worked. Right? So we don't have a zero-pillar pension scheme until recently, where the government would pay your pension. So we don't have that. The only way that a 65-year-old today would have had a pension is if they had worked and saved into our compulsory savings scheme. It's their money that they worked for and saved over the course of their lifetime. Okay. But self-reliance, individual responsibility is the kind of the underlying principle of our social security system, social support system. Family is the first line of social support, so we depend on the families. After, if you can't support yourself, family will have to provide. Then the community and the government then steps in as the sort of the provider of last resort. And we call this self-reliance and the concept of many helping hands. Right? Many helping hands in the community, government providing that safety net at the back. And this community and government is, again, this is the Balagat. Okay, this is there's so many people involved in particular long-term care, right? We've got government bodies, we've got people called enablers, in particular the National Council for Social Services, NCSS. We have different social service agencies. We have donors and grant makers that would, again, I'm sure that they also exist in Israel, and volunteers, right? So a whole host of, and again, I think the Professor Brick's picture, we would have something similar in Singapore too, right? We have this multiplicity of providers and funders and regulations and we need to sort this out. I did mention that we did have these pillars of old age social security, the primary one of which is home ownership. Those 84% of the population living in public housing, they pretty much all own their own homes. Right? So even the bottom decile of the population, of those bottom decile, 8 out of those 10 households own their home. So they have home equity. They own their own homes. Right? So they don't pay any rent. And that's a big amount that they don't have to pay. So again, Professor Brick.
In the means test?
I'm sorry?
Is this calculated in the mean test that you give a long-term care by?
Yes.
Ownership.
Yes. Yeah. So it's one of the things, right? So if you live in a big 5-room public housing public flat, it will count against you, and you won't have that much of a subsidy as somebody living in a 1-room flat.
So that incentivizes other people to move out of big homes.
Possibly, but then what they do with the proceeds of that. So let's say they sold a 5-room flat, they would have ended up with not a small amount of money, and they should be using that to pay for their long-term care. Right? So they can't just sell it and say, okay, I don't have any more money. They'll look at your other resources too.
They can sell the home or pass it over to the children?
Yes, they can. Yeah. These are flats that are sold not in perpetuity, but on 99-year leasehold. Right? So yes, you can pass on the remaining lease to your family, bequeath it, but it's not for yours forever. Okay, so home ownership is a major plank of our social security system. The other aspect is healthcare assurance, right? And again, we spend not so much on our healthcare, but we have a very extensive, very comprehensive health system, right? That community, the hospital that you saw on the left side, that is the level of healthcare that we've got. It is of high quality.
But again, 60% out of the pocket.
It is 60% out of pocket. Okay, so we're getting.
So the health system is free, or you have to pay? You have to buy your health insurance.
Yeah, we have 3 layers. I have a slide on this, so I'll talk through it. It is critical to the story I would like to tell. Okay, so home ownership, healthcare. This is workfare is income subsidies for those particularly elderly people that don't earn so much. So the government tops up. So if your monthly income is less than 2,000, you're above 55 years old. Your income is subsidized by the government to lift you up to this level. Okay, but it depends on you working. So you need to work and earn an income. If your income is below $2,000 Singapore dollars a month, then the government will top you up. Okay, not in cash only, but in payments into your pension fund. Okay.
Up to 2,000.
Up to 2,000. Yes. And then in 2016, we introduced this Silver Support Scheme, which is our first zero-pillar pension scheme. So if you haven't worked in your life and your pension account, your own pension account is below a certain threshold, the government will give you this Silver Support Scheme. About 200 to 300 Singapore dollars a month, which is not very much, but it's a start. Okay, so the Central Provident Fund is the primary way that Singapore has developed to essentially underpin the pillars that I talked about just now: home ownership, healthcare, and retirement adequacy. Right? So this is the savings institution, and it's quite unique amongst many countries. But it is, Malaysia has it, India has something similar, but we've taken it and developed it to, essentially create those pillars of old age security. Okay. And how it works is like this. Whilst you're in your working life, the government will take, you'll pay 20% of your income out of your wages into your pension fund. Okay, and your employer will contribute on top of that 17%. So you're essentially saving 37% of your income, and that goes into your own account held with the Central Provident Fund. Okay, that money, let's say I earned $1,000, $370 would go into the account, 23% would go into the ordinary account, 8% into the Medisave account, which is healthcare, and 6% for the special account. This is for a 34-year-old. Okay. Depending on age, these proportions will change. Ordinary account, you can use it for a few things, particularly housing. Okay, so you save that $370. Large part of it, particularly when you're young, goes into this ordinary account. You can use some of that to pay off your mortgage.
At any age?
I'm sorry? Yes.
At any age, or just when you are old?
At any age. So again, this is one way Singaporeans use to pay for those homes that they bought from the government. Right? So you're building up home equity, right? A 25-year-old wanting to buy a home, setting up a family, you go to the government, you say, okay, I've accumulated some money, and I can use this ordinary account contributions to pay for my mortgage, 30-year mortgage that I take out. Right? So I can use the money that I'm saving to convert into home equity, right? That I'm building up over my working life. So
You
that's
need a down payment at the beginning. You need some down payment to start your purchase.
yes, you would. Okay, and you can use some of this if you've got enough. So it's unlikely for a 25-year-old, but it's more likely for a 35-year-old because they may have accumulated enough.
Chris, I'll be rude here, but it's a very important point, and I ask Chris to emphasize it. Please correct me. Singapore is very unique in this regard, at least. Okay, almost. It's basically an individual account. It stays with the individual's control, but it's compulsory. In other words, like if the government would tell us, look, I opened for you an account where you have to contribute so much compulsory contribution, but it's your own account for your own use, also in healthcare. And then you can use it for different activities which are public activities, like healthcare, like public health. What?
The limit use it has to be approved by the government.
Yeah, no, the government is actually forcing you to do it. It's even giving you an allowance in the taxes for your contribution. So it's an individual account, okay, which you can use for these purposes. It's your account. It doesn't go into the treasury, okay, and you can use it for the different things, and that's very unique.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the thing that I wanted to point out is not so much the housing bit, although it is important. It's the health bit, Medisave.
But it's besides the health insurance for the young, but the old insurance.
Okay, so I'll talk about the different ways that we pay for housing, for healthcare shortly. Okay.
This is for the elderly, or not for everybody?
This is for everybody. This Central Provident Fund applies to everybody. The moment you start work, you're going to be contributing 20% of your own self. So again, my $10,000 or $1,000, I pay $2,000, $200. My employer will pay $170, right? So
I want to understand. In addition to that, everyone pays income tax, no?
yes. So they'll pay.
And it adds up to how much?
It's small. So if I only earned $1,000 Singapore dollars a month, I probably not pay any tax at all. But if I earn,
You have to contribute to this.
I have to contribute to
You
this.
have to contribute to this.
The highest
The
rate.
highest rate of
70%.
personal income tax
Yeah,
is 18%.
18.
Okay.
1/8.
Sorry, 17% now. 17, 17.
1/7.
In addition,
The highest rate of tax.
so in addition to those 37,
Let's make it as simple as I can make it. We have income tax, etc. But suppose that whatever we contribute to Bituach Leumi, yeah, is a personal account. Like I have a checkbook, Bituach Leumi, and I can write out of this check as I wish, according to government regulation. And so this is the essence of private responsibility or individual responsibility. Am I right?
Yes.
Now, I will just make another point why I thought this may be an important point to stress, in addition to the interesting case of Singapore, is that maybe one option for our long-term care insurance, which is an issue in Israel, okay, at least in my opinion, to have some sort of compulsory account, okay, where if the government doesn't want to tax, and I don't want to go into it, this can be a sort of a solution, okay?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. So that is particularly the case for medical and sort of savings, right? Because every month I am saving $80. If I only paid $1,000 a month, I'm saving $80 into my own health savings account. Okay, so $80 here, and I can use this to pay for my hospitalization expenses and some approved medical insurance.
And if it's not enough,
Uh,
you are sick when you are young, and you didn't accumulate the money.
then we have this. Okay. So this is the way that Singapore pays for healthcare. Okay. So subsidies from government. The government pays for, builds that fancy hospital that I showed you, right? Kutek Wat Hospital, paid for by the government. Right? They build it, and a hospital bills, right? For Singaporean citizens like myself, last year I had a very complicated surgery. My bill, a large part of that was paid for by the government. The bill that I see, it says a total bill, but much of it has been already paid for by the government through subsidies. So my tax is paid for that. Okay. On top of that, because I have saved $80 a month for the longest time, I have medical savings, right? So Medisave. So out of that, I might be able to use part of that Medisave money to pay for my bill, my hospital bill. Okay. Out of this Medisave account, I also purchase basic health insurance from the government, organized by the government, called MediShield Life. This is universal health insurance. The premiums are the same for everybody of the same age, so it's age denominated, but everybody pays into this
It's compulsory? Everybody has to pay.
Yeah.
So it's compulsory. It's not
compulsory.
Okay.
Okay. So they all also have MediShield Life.
It's another tax.
I'm sorry?
It's another tax.
It's not a tax, but you could also think about it as a tax because everybody has to pay it. Okay? But the premiums are the same, irrespective of how much you earn. And the premium that you pay for this basic universal health insurance is sized based on this. So you make a calculation. Over the life course, your typical citizen is going to earn this much. They are going to generate this much of medical savings. The premium that you pay for this is, again, sized to kind of make sure that this scheme is sustainable and it's not going to be making losses in the future. It's actuarially fair. In fact, I would almost say it's actuarially conservative, very conservative.
Do you have any private medical system?
Yes. So on top of that, rich people can pay for private health insurance over and on top of this. Right?
Private?
Private, yes. And that's quite large. And that's actually part of the problem. We have too much private health insurance and we haven't controlled it enough. So if you don't have enough of your own money in your savings account and you've exceeded the MediShield Life, or you couldn't even pay those premiums in the first place because you don't have enough of this, then the government will step in and cover you through Medifund. Again, as I said, 3 billion Singapore dollars set aside by the government to pay for that. Okay. Now we don't have that for long-term care, and this is the gap that we have at the moment. But we are moving towards that. Okay, that model of subsidies plus 3 M's: the Medisave, MediShield, and Medifund. So subsidies we still have, and that will invariably increase as the aged population in Singapore increases. So, somehow taxes would have to rise over time to pay for more of these subsidies. On top of that, what from 2020 Singaporeans will be able to do is to tap on their Medisave to pay for long-term care expenditure. Right? On top of that, we will create this scheme called CareShield Life, which is a severe disability insurance program scheme, rather like MediShield Life that I showed you for medical expenditure, but this is for severe disability. Again, same idea. You pay your premiums out of your Medisave accounts from age 30 onwards up to 65, and then you get this coverage for life if you become severely disabled. It pays out not so very much. It's about $600 a month to cover some of your severe disability care costs. Care costs.
You receive money.
This one is cash.
No services.
No services.
You buy services.
You can buy services
Yeah,
with
you
money.
can buy it, you get money.
But you get money. This is a cash scheme. Not in existence yet. What we have now is an older scheme. The current scheme is called Elder Shield. It's not for life. It's and you start payments only at 40. It's a much reduced scheme. It's not compulsory. A lot of people opt out. Whereas CareShield Life will be like MediShield Life, compulsory. Everybody has to pay. Okay. And then similar, we have Elder Fund again. This has just been set up, and by 2020, the government will also cover those severely disabled people aged above 30, or 30 and above, for their long-term care needs. Okay, so we're not there yet, but we're moving to it. But the point I would have to make is just common with healthcare, long-term care financing is incredibly dependent on this Medisave account. We are having the calling on these medical savings account that we generated to pay for our healthcare, of which we will need more in the future because we're aging so quickly, but also our long-term care needs. Right? So my worry is that we don't have enough. We've got this, it's great. It was set up a long time ago and we've accumulated quite substantial savings, but our needs are great. So to build up this savings base, you need to start early. You need to start early, and again, if I guess there's any takeaway from this, the earlier we start building up this reserve, this buffer, the better.
You want to continue before we ask questions?
I have 2 more slides, but yeah.
Go ahead. We'll wait.
We still have co-payments, and the out-of-pocket is very substantial. Substantial for healthcare, for medical care, as well as for long-term care. And this slide, maybe if anybody wants these details, more than happy to share the slide with you. So you don't have to look at the numbers, but suffice to say that our incentives for long-term care are still skewed, right? As I said, the government provides a lot of subsidies to put people into hospital care, or hospitals, right? So again, as I said earlier, a few years back we had this hospital bed crunch because people were sending their elderly parents to the hospital, right? It's cheap, right? They can claim on the government support, subsidies, then they can use their Medisave to pay for that hospital care. So, if I just want to go on holiday, I'll send my parents there to the hospital, right? The subsidies and the government support for long-term care, home care or nursing care, is a lot less. You pay more out of pocket, right? So, we need to rebalance this and instead of encouraging people to send their parents to the hospital, treat them in the community, care for them in the community where it's a lot more efficient. So we need to restructure this. And again, one of the things that I think maybe we need to emphasize is that we've been guilty of over-medicalizing aging. Right? So our aging planning office, this agency that deals with older people, is parked under the Ministry of Health. And I wonder whether necessarily that is the best place for it to be, right? Because everybody has a health lens, a medical lens when I think about aging. And it's not always health. It's an important part, but it's not the most important, necessarily. So, and then, so just really to end, these are the next steps that we need to think about in terms of elder care. As I said, aligning those financial incentives across the care spectrum, care continuum. We do need to, again, beef up our community and home care infrastructure. We need better monetization options. So a lot of Singaporeans have a lot of home equity, right, in that CPF account, 23% over my life force, working life force. I need to be able to take some of that saving built in my home and pay for my long-term care needs. Right? So I need to be able to do that better. manpower, we need a lot more of that, and not so much from low-skilled workers from Southeast Asia, providing kind of a very low level of quality of care to our elders.
Do you have shortage in manpower?
Very much so.
Personnel, doctors, nurses, what?
We need another 80,000 long-term care workers over the course of the next 13 years. Sorry, 11 years now, until 2030. The projection is that we need 80,000.
How are you going to get them?
So one of the ways in which we talk about elders living longer, healthier lives, and this is the longevity dividend. That yes, they're living longer. They also should be remaining productive. The healthy ones look after less healthy ones. Right? So that is a resource, an asset that we can utilize. And we've done a calculation. If health trends improve in Singapore as they have done over the course of the last 20 years, the health-adjusted life expectancy for Singaporeans aged above 65 by 2030 will add another 300,000 person years of productivity. Right? That's 12% of our current labor force. 80,000 workers, no problem, because we have 300,000 healthy older people to help each other.
It doesn't matter who will be the member of the parliament, and it doesn't matter who will be the minister of aging. It depends if someone at high position in the government will say, this is my mission. When the Minister of Finance took office, he said, my mission is the prices of housing. So he took from the Minister of Interior what he wanted to take from the Minhal HaTichnun. He took the Land Authority, Minhal Mekarkei Israel. He took everything under his control in order to reduce the price of housing. So it's possible, but it's possible if someone will use it as the main agenda and part of the coalition negotiation.